In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has had the opportunity to be fully briefed on the Minister for Immigration's statement in the House yesterday, in which the Minister expressed the view that the behaviour of children and grandchildren of immigrants meant Malcolm Fraser made a mistake by allowing their parents and grandparents to migrate to Australia in the late 1970s. Is this the Prime Minister's position, yes or no?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I'm not going to accept the Leader of the Opposition's characterisation of remarks made by the Minister for Immigration. The fact of the matter is,
on my
Mr.
left,
Speaker, that the greatest mistake in immigration, the greatest failure, which we don't need to be a historian to recall, which we don't need to go back to the 1970s to reflect upon, the greatest mistake made in immigration was by those opposite, when they abandoned the integrity of our borders, when they threw away Australia's sovereignty, and they allowed 50,000 unauthorised arrivals and over 1,200 deaths at sea. And I can well understand how members opposite seek to tear down the Minister for Immigration. They can't stand the fact that he succeeded where they have failed. They can't stand the fact that he took 2,000 children out of detention centres. They can't stand the galling fact that, unlike the member for Watson, they did not
Prime
betray
Minister will
those
resume his
children.
seat. The Treasurer and the Leader of the House will cease interjecting. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? No. Yes, that's fine. The member for MACKELLAR.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister—
The member for MACKELLAR will resume his question again. The member for MACKELLAR has the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister update the House on the APEC Leaders Forum in Peru, including how free trade is delivering jobs and growth for Australia?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation is an economic summit that was, in fact, the result of an initiative by Bob Hawke. Those were in the days when the Labor Party believed in free trade and believed in economic integration with our neighbours in Asia. Sadly, not anymore. Not anymore. It's a very different Labor Party today. Now they're campaigning against the economic liberalisation and the free trade that delivers jobs and growth, just like they're seeking to protect the CFMEU and the thugs of the CFMEU, whereas Bob Hawke, of course, deregistered the Builders Labourers Federation. But, Mr Speaker, APEC accounts for 60% of global GDP, 73% of our trade. Now, leaders were very focused on the need to maintain the momentum towards further economic integration, recognising the way in which trade has delivered strong growth and jobs in Australia, in Asia, indeed in Latin America, in Peru, where the meeting was held. But they recognised, all the leaders recognised, the need to ensure that growth was inclusive. We recognise that we are at a time of rapid economic change that has had enormous benefits to billions of people. But invariably at times of change there is disruption, and communities, industries, businesses can feel left behind, and it's vitally important that governments ensure that nobody is left behind and growth is absolutely inclusive. Now, we have seen, Mr Speaker, in Australia, the benefits of opening up those big markets in Asia over the last term of government, are the benefits that have flown to regional Australia. And there's perhaps no better example of that than Tasmania, a state which has been facing strong economic headwinds for many years, but is now enjoying some of the strongest growth
the member for Sydney.
It's had for many years because of the great export opportunities offered particularly from the China market. So, Mr Speaker, right across the board, strong support for continued commitment to free trade, to economic integration, to removing the barriers to trade, whether they are in the form of tariffs or behind-the-border regulations that inhibit the export and import of services across the region. So, Mr Speaker, we know that free trade and open markets delivers jobs and growth. It's up to us as leaders to ensure that that growth is thoroughly inclusive, so that everybody enjoys the benefits of the prosperity that free trade will deliver.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to reports in the Herald Sun of a panicked 2-hour-long extraordinary meeting of the National Party last night. Following this meeting, for the first time in the history of Liberal national coalitions, 3 national ministers in the Cabinet failed to vote for the Cabinet position.
The Leader of the Opposition,
What are the consequences
will just resume his seat. Look, the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure is bellowing in my right ear. I'm trying to hear the question. Can members please be quiet, at least while the question's being asked? The Leader of the Opposition will start his question again.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to reports in the Herald Sun of a panicked 2-hour-long extraordinary meeting of the National Party last night. Following this meeting, for the first time in the history of Liberal national coalitions, 3 Nationals ministers in the Cabinet failed to vote for the Cabinet position. What are the consequences in the Prime Minister's government for Cabinet ministers who failed to vote for the Cabinet position?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and dealings in the Liberal Party room are not the subject of questions in the House, or at least in accordance with standing orders, let alone asking me about deliberations in the party room of a party of which I'm not a member. I mean, it really is extraordinary. I can understand dealing with the Byzantine politics of the Labor Party following all the factions, but you'd think the honourable member opposite would have worked out that I'm in the Liberal Party and the Deputy Prime Minister's in the National Party. Mr Speaker, the Coalition Cabinet, cutting right to the chase, the Coalition Cabinet, my government, my Cabinet, of which I'm the Prime Minister and my colleague is the Deputy Prime Minister, the Leader of the Nationals, resolved to extend indefinitely the ban on the Adler shotgun that had been previously subject to a sunset clause. That was a Cabinet decision.
Members on my left. The member for Morton is warned as well. The member for North Sydney has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister advise the House how the Registered Organisations Commission will crack down on union rorts and rip-offs and ensure that union bosses are acting in the interests of hard-working Australians?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, last night the Senate passed the Registered Organisations Bill. And what this meant was that for the first time, trade union officials and indeed officials of employer organisations would be subject to the same standards of accountability to their members as company directors are to their shareholders. This was doing no more than applying the same standards of accountability that we expect of company directors. Now you would think that after Craig Thompson, after Cathy Jackson, after one scandal after another, you would think that the Labor Party would have been lining up to support that legislation, because they would have recognised that when so many rorts and frauds and malfeasance had been exposed, the best thing to do was to ensure that governance was improved. You'd think that is what the Labor Party would have done. But, Mr Speaker, what you saw was a very clear class war shown in this matter. And these were the classes at war. The Leader of the Opposition, a member of the union officials class, of the union bosses class, stuck to his own. He wanted to defend the bosses in the trade union movement. He wanted to stand up for them. And what we saw again was the coalition standing up for the more than 2 million members of registered organisations across Australia, demanding for them the accountability they're entitled to.
The member for Sydney is now warned.
Just as we stood up for the owner-drivers who are being put out of business, 35,000 of them, by legislation introduced by the Leader of the Opposition when he was in government at the behest of the Transport Workers Union. That was its deliberate intent to put hard-working Australian businessmen and women out of business. And of course, after the parliament came back after the election, we were able to amend the Fair Work Act to protect 60,000 volunteer firefighters in Victoria who, again, a Labor government was seeking to subordinate to another militant union, in that case the UFU. And once again, we saw the Labor Party in this parliament and the Leader of the Opposition, a former union boss, standing up for his fellow union bosses. He has sold the members of trade unions down the river again and again, whether it's the Chiquita mushrooms or Clean Event or here in this parliament. We are standing up for the members of the unions. We're ensuring they have accountable, honest processes in their unions managing their billions of dollars managed by these organisations will henceforth be conducted transparently and with full accountability.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Clause 23 of the Prime Minister's Cabinet Handbook states, and I quote, "Members of the Cabinet must publicly support all government decisions made in the Cabinet, even if they do not agree with them." Has the Prime Minister disciplined the 3 Cabinet Ministers who took the unprecedented, disloyal step of failing to vote for the Cabinet position? Isn't it clear this Prime Minister is so weak, his government is so divided, he can't even keep his Cabinet in line?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot claim to be an authority on the practices of the Senate, but my understanding is that when there is a vote that has
the member for Lindsay is
support,
warned.
when there is a vote that has the support of both the government and the opposition, the coalition and the Labor Party, it's referred to as a Mickey, and that is a vote which, because it is going to be carried by such an overwhelming majority, front benches and indeed other members regularly do not attend. And so I can note that on this particular vote, the Shadow Special Minister of State, the Labor Senator Farrell, didn't attend. Senator Carr didn't attend. Indeed, the Labor Party's Chief Whip, Senator Urquhart, didn't attend. Mr. Speaker, that is apparently the practice in the Senate, but that is the advice I can give the House as to practices in the other place.
The member for Denison. The member for Denison has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Minister, the government is quick to say that increased defence spending will provide an economic stimulus for states and regions in need of a boost. So what tangible commitment can you now give that Tasmania will get its fair share of the work? For example, will Hobart's Prince of Wales Bay Defence Manufacturing Precinct benefit from the as-yet-to-be-decided subcontract work on the C-1180 offshore patrol vessel and the C-5000 future frigates projects? Moreover, will you commit to visit Prince of Wales Bay and meet the companies based there? Tasmania and Hobart need a boost too, and there are many firms with the skills and advantages to help build and sustain Australia's future defence needs.
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Well, I thank the member for Denison for his question, because it gives me the opportunity to reassure him and the rest of the House that the government's program for naval shipbuilding is on schedule. It is on track to deliver thousands and thousands of jobs right across Australia, enormous investment in the economy, in every city right across our great country, because this government has committed to 54 naval vessels, whereas the previous government, the Labor government, committed to none at all in the 6 years that they were in government. In fact, they reduced spending on defence to 1.56% of GDP, the lowest since 1938, since the years of appeasement. Now, the member for Denison asked specifically about what's in it for Tasmania, which is a very fair question for him to ask. And I can assure him that Tasmania has benefited in the past from the naval shipbuilding plan. For example, Taylor Brothers, which is very near the Prince of Wales precinct that you talked about, has provided material for the air warfare destroyer program, things like refrigeration spaces and prefabricated doors, etc. A business called CBG Systems in Hobart have provided things to do with fire equipment and fire blankets and so on for the air warfare destroyer program. And he asks about what might be in the Future Frigates program, where we're building 9 vessels, and the Offshore Patrol Vessels program, which is 12 vessels. And I can tell him that the workshops for those 2 programs are happening right now, where the businesses that are in the defence industry space or want to be in the defence industry space are being given the opportunity to meet with the Department of Defence and the other bidders in the 2 programs to show what they might be able to do. In Adelaide, this attracted 200 businesses. In Perth, 300 businesses. In Darwin, it was about 100. In Brisbane, it was 150. And Sydney and Melbourne are yet to come, but they are both subscribed by hundreds of businesses already. And the workshop in Hobart will occur on December the 7th. So on December the 7th, businesses in Hobart and elsewhere in Tasmania will get the opportunity to come and meet with the Department of Defence and learn in a workshop situation how they can take advantage. Because one of the key differences between the Turnbull government's approach to defence and defence industry compared to other governments has been that we want to have as our #1 priority the capability of our defence forces, and our #2 priority is doing as much of it as possible in Australia.
Resume his seat. Has the minister concluded his answer? The minister's concluded his answer. The member for Denison will resume his seat. The member for Bonner has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline how a transparent and efficient construction sector supports a strong budget and a growing economy? Will the Treasurer also advise the House of the cost to hard-working Australians of widespread disruption and lawlessness on Australian building sites?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question and his keen interest in ensuring that we remove lawlessness from the building and construction industry. And can I start by commending the Minister for Employment for the success that we've seen in the other place in the passage of the Registered Organisations Bill, Mr Speaker, that ensures groundbreaking reform to ensure that unions will face the same level of scrutiny and accountability as those of company directors in this country. And we know that those opposite did not support those measures, Mr Speaker. And in the same way that they continue to refuse to support the Australian Building and Construction Commission being restored. And it leads me to wonder, why would they be opposing these important changes that will lift productivity in this country, that will support the interests of workers in this country and improve wage outcomes and jobs in this country? It's a simple issue, Mr Speaker, and I was reflecting on it, and maybe we get a show of hands. How many of those on that side of the House are members of trade unions? Show of hands. How many are there? They all keeping their hands down. They don't want to commit to it, Mr Speaker. Show me your hands. How many of those on that side of the House have been the beneficiaries of donations from the CFMEU? Let's get a show of hands, Mr Speaker. They're all down here. How many of those today are members of the CFMEU, Mr Speaker? No show of hands, and I particularly note the member for Griffith has kept her hands very much below the table. So just as well, Mr Speaker, I could go to the Register of Interests and I could see when she was asked the membership of any organisation where a conflict of interest with a member's public duties could foreseeably arise or be seen to arise. Guess what it lists? Membership of the CFMEU, Mr Speaker. That's what it says. Now, as a member of the Leader of the Opposition's executive, and in particular as the Shadow Assistant Minister for Universities, I wonder what the member for Griffith thinks about the state of affairs of the Queensland University of Technology, where the Fair Work Building Commission launched the Federal Circuit Court proceedings against the CFMEU and official Michael Miles after he allegedly disrupted 2 major concrete pours on the $60 million project and the Queensland University of Technology. And on the 8th of April of 2016, the federal court ordered penalties totalling some $52,000 against the CMFEU and Mr Miles, and Judge Jarrett found that Mr Miles' conduct to be a deliberate and intentional disregard of workplace laws. Now, that's a fellow member of the CFMEU, Mr Speaker, from a shadow minister who's supposed to care about the building and construction of universities, Mr Speaker. But I note it is telling that not one of them would have put up their hand and declare their association with the CFMEU when they're acting as a block to bring it to heel.
Has expired. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's previous answer about his missing national cabinet ministers. How can the Prime Minister claim the absence of all 3 National Party cabinet ministers in the Senate was insignificant when Senator Leyenhome has confirmed to Peter Van Onselen on Sky News that these cabinet ministers deliberately refused to back the cabinet position because they didn't agree with it?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer to my earlier answer and remind the Leader of the Opposition once again that the decision to extend the ban indefinitely until such time it being expected that being anticipated that at some point in the future the state and territory ministers and the Commonwealth Minister will agree on a reclassification, but the ban has been extended without an end date, and that was a decision of the Cabinet.
The member for Grey. Member for Grey has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment. Will the Minister explain to the House why it is important to restore the rule of law to building sites in Australia? How will the government's policy in relation to the ABCC and the Registered Organisation Commission help bring this about?
The Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grey for his question. And I know that he, like I and all members of this side of the House, are absolutely delighted with the fact that the Registered Organisations Commission bill passed in the early hours of this morning. And full congratulations should go to Senator McKellar Cash from Western Australia, who has done a sterling job to drive through a bill that was failed to be passed by the last Senate on, I think, at least 2 occasions. It may have been 3 occasions. And in fact, of course, was the cause of the double dissolution election. And the Senate has done its job, which is to consider the Registered Organisations Commission bill, amend it where necessary, and send it back to the House of Representatives. So it is a red-letter day in industrial relations in Australia, and it proves once again that the coalition is on the side of the workers and the Labor Party is on the side of the union bosses. It took us to stand up for the 2 million members of registered organisations in Australia. It took the coalition to stand up for the 60,000 volunteers in the Country Fire Association against the union, the United Firefighters Union. It took this side of politics to stand up for the owner-operators of transport businesses against the TWU. Over and over again, Mr Speaker, it is the coalition who stands up for the little small business, for the little man and woman, against trade union bosses who always put themselves first and Australia last, Mr Speaker. And we saw last Friday, 2 union leaders charged with 172 counts of fraud against their union, against their workers, totalling $870,000 of people being robbed of their own money by 2 union leaders, and eventually their names will come out. It'll be fascinating to see whether members on the other side of the House rush to their defence, as one of them might have done in their maiden speech not that long ago, Mr Speaker, but we will see, no doubt. Mr Speaker, the reality is the work is not finished. The ABCC must be passed in the next sitting fortnight. It must be passed if the job is to be completed of cleaning up unions and cleaning up building sites. It is critically important. Just today, we found out that the CFMEU in Adelaide holds the record for the most number of fines in Australia of any state. The CFMEU, over $1 million worth of fines levied against the CFMEU in South Australia in the last year or two by the Fair Work Commission, and Nigel Hadgkiss, the Fair Work Commissioner, said despite significant penalties being handed down, repeated and deliberate contraventions of workplace laws continue to be a common feature at work sites. It's time for Labor to stand up for the worker and pass the ABCC.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given last night, no member of the National Party Senate team voted to keep the government's ban on the Adler shotgun, and given that the Prime Minister has just confirmed that the Deputy Prime Minister and Leader of the National Party backed the ban in the Cabinet, does the Prime Minister's Deputy still support the ban on the importation of the Adler shotgun? And if so, why did none of his team in the Senate back up the Cabinet decision?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, I will call the Deputy Prime Minister in a second, and I can see the Prime Minister referring the question to him. I've said before, and I've listened to all these questions carefully, the earlier question, whilst it did relate to the National Party, of which the Prime Minister is not a member, did relate to the Cabinet. But what members can't do is be asked to answer for other members. They simply can't, and it's well established in the practice. But so I'm going to leave. I need to uphold the practice and the standing orders, and I'm going to move to the next question. The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health, Aged Care and Sport. Will the Minister explain to the House how a re-established Australian Building and Construction Commission will ensure hard-working Australians receive the health services and infrastructure they deserve? Is the Minister aware of any threats to the progress of health infrastructure?
The Minister for Health. The member for Bendigo has already been warned. Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for Boothby for her question. And she certainly understands the importance of the health of her electorate and the health of the nation. Members on our side, of course, know about the government's record spending on Medicare and public hospitals. Public hospital infrastructure, $95 billion over 5 years, more than any previous government has spent. But, Mr. Speaker, we need more than record funding to deliver the world-class health system that Australians have come to expect. It also takes infrastructure. It takes hospital infrastructure. We need hospital infrastructure to deliver our record funding. And unfortunately, due to the actions of unions on building sites across this country, described variously in the Trade Union Royal Commission as bullies, liars, thugs and thieves, that infrastructure has been delayed. And when you see a hospital that doesn't get opened on time, when you see beds that don't arrive on time, when you see treatments that aren't delivered on time, you know that this Labor Party is putting the health of their union mates before the health of the nation. Due to the actions of unions on hospital building sites, and I'll give you an example.
Falinski for the final time.
We've heard examples in the House: Fiona Stanley Hospital, Perth Children's Hospital, Southern Lady Salento Children's Hospital. Stoppages and strikes cost $9 million on Lady Salento Children's Hospital. No one has made any attempt to call out the unions behind this behaviour. But, Mr. Speaker, when I talk about infrastructure, I want to refer to a hospital in the member's own state, the Adelaide Hospital, which is the third most expensive building in the history of the world. The Adelaide Hospital is the third most expensive building in the history of the world. And by the way, the members are yelling and screaming because they don't want to admit the truth.
The member for Gorton has been warned already.
That comes back down to Labor union members and their relationship with the union movement. They are a hopelessly compromised relationship. They used to care about the patients in these. They put the relationship with the union ahead of their relationship.
The Minister will resume her seat. The member for Wakefield and the members for Kingsford Smith will cease interjecting. The member for Gorton on a point of order and will state the point of order. The member for Gorton will resume his seat. The member for Gorton will resume his seat. The member for Gorton has already been warned. I'm not going to keep continuously warning people on points of order when I've asked them to resume their seat. It's a defiance of the House, and the member for Gorton will leave under 94A. Yes, I'll hear the Manager of Opposition Business, and members on my right will cease interjecting.
The member for Gorton, when he rose on that point of order, stated relevance and was about to give the reason why, and was not given the opportunity.
Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Leader of the House will cease interjecting.
Wow, out of control. The issue that he was raising was about people having died on the site.
And members on the Leader of the House will cease interjecting.
And given that that was the circumstance, to say that he had to sit down instantly when he rose for that particular reason, I think is a harsher than usual ruling, Mr. Speaker.
All right, I'll ask the Manager of Opposition Business to resume his seat, and the minister will cease interjecting. The member for Isaacs and the minister will cease interjecting, or they'll be having their conversation outside the chamber. I'm going to make a couple of points to the Manager of Opposition Business, and I have heard him. And I do respect the fact that the member for Gorton was obviously passionate on the issue. I could see that from here, as are other members. Nonetheless, I've made it very clear on points of order that if I'm hearing a point of order and I ask someone to resume their seat, they need to resume their seat immediately. No matter how passionate they feel about the issue, they won't remain at the dispatch box and shout into the chamber. It was for that reason, and he had been warned for his conduct twice previously in question time. And it was the combination of those things and not resuming his seat that I was forced to eject him. If he'd resumed his seat, I would have heard from the Manager of Opposition Business. Has the minister concluded?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Labor wants to play politics, they might like to be reminded about safety. They might like to be reminded that Senator Kitching sat the safety tests, fraudulently sat the safety tests of 6 union leaders and was referred to the DPP as a result. The point, which is something that they have never mentioned. The point we want to make.
The member's time has expired. The Leader of the House and the member for Sydney are both testing my patience. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Clause 23 of the Prime Minister's Cabinet Handbook states, and I quote, "Cabinet ministers cannot disassociate themselves from or repudiate the decisions of their Cabinet colleagues unless they resign from the Cabinet. It is the Prime Minister's role to enforce Cabinet solidarity. Given it is up to the Prime Minister to enforce Cabinet solidarity, why hasn't he sacked these 3 disloyal ministers? Is it that he genuinely believes their absence was a coincidence, or is he just too weak to run his Cabinet?"
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question about weakness, because it reminds me of Paul Kelly's observation in his book Triumph and Demise, when he said the distrust between Rudd and Shorten was intense and enduring. The Gillard camp was contemptuous of Shorten, considering him weak and duplicitous. Neither side trusted him, and neither side revised its view. And the Australian people won't revise their view of him either.
The member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Energy. Will the minister update the House on how the government's policies are supporting Australia's energy sector? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for O'Connor for his question and acknowledge his deep commitment to resources across Australia, given the richness of the resource industry in his electorate, and ensuring that Australia remains a global energy powerhouse. And who would have thought back in 1989, when Australia had one LNG facility, that today we would have 10 either operating or under construction, which will see Australia overtake Qatar as the world's largest exporter of LNG by 2020. In fact, we'll see a tripling of our export earnings up to $49 billion, which will see LNG join coal and iron ore among our top 3 exports. And there are enormous opportunities for the LNG sector in Australia, but what is holding it back is actually the high cost of construction, because the BCA has told us that to build an LNG plant in Australia is some 50% higher cost than to build a similar plant in the US Gulf of Mexico. And industrial relations are a major component of that. And we know that when the ABCC was in place, we saw increased productivity, a fall in industrial disputation and more money flowing into Australia in terms of investment. And Woodside's experience with their 4th and 5th LNG trains is illustrative, because with their 4th train, before the ABCC came into being, they lost 254,000 hours due to industrial action. But their 5th train, which came into being after the ABCC became a cop on the beat, saw that drop by some 90% to only 27,000 hours lost to industrial action. Now, Mr Speaker, you don't have to trust the industry groups like ACCI and the BCA as to why the ABCC is important. You don't have to trust us on this side. You only have to listen to a former Labor Minister for Resources, the former member for Batman, who said in a speech to CEDA, and I quote, this is worth listening to, "As the son of a bricklayer, I know a thing or two about the building industry, but it's time that some in today's union leadership recognise that their members' long-term interests are aligned with their long-term job security. Rather than seeing the ABCC as a tool that allows one side to get an upper hand over the other in some never-ending ideological skirmish, it should be seen for what it was, a mechanism that holds both sides to account and which can help deliver projects on time and on budget." There you have it from the former Labor member for Batman.
The Leader of the Opposition.
I seek leave to move the following motion. That the House notes Clause 23 of the Prime Minister's own Cabinet handbook states members of the Cabinet must publicly support all government decisions made in the Cabinet, even if they do not agree with them. Cabinet ministers cannot disassociate themselves from or repudiate the decisions of their Cabinet colleagues unless they resign from the Cabinet. It is the Prime Minister's role as Chair of the Cabinet, where necessary, to enforce Cabinet solidarity. B. For the first time in the history of the Liberal National Coalition, 3 National Party Cabinet ministers failed to vote for the Cabinet's position, contrary to the Prime Minister's Cabinet handbook and Cabinet solidarity. C. The dysfunction and division in the government means the Prime Minister and his ministers are spending every minute fighting for their own jobs and not the jobs of Australians, therefore condemns the Prime Minister for being so weak and leading a government that is so divided that the Prime Minister is powerless to act.
Is leave granted? Leave is not granted. The Leader of the Opposition.
I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion forthwith. That the House notes Clause 23 of the Prime Minister's own Cabinet handbook states members of the Cabinet must publicly support all government decisions made in the Cabinet, even if they do not agree with them. Cabinet ministers cannot disassociate themselves from or repudiate them, the decisions of their Cabinet colleagues, unless they resign from the Cabinet. It is the Prime Minister's role as Chair of the Cabinet, where necessary, to enforce Cabinet solidarity. B. For the first time in the history of the Liberal National Coalition, 3 National Party ministers in the Cabinet failed to vote for the Cabinet's position, contrary to the Prime Minister's Cabinet Handbook and Cabinet solidarity. C, the dysfunction and division in the government means the Prime Minister and his ministers are spending every minute fighting for their own jobs and not the jobs of Australians. And 2, therefore condemns the Prime Minister for being so weak and leading a government that is so divided that the Prime Minister is powerless to act. Division, chaos and dysfunction, business as usual in the Turnbull.
The Leader of the House has moved that the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. Order. The question is that the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Dawson and Gray tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Morton and Lawler tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 74, noes 71. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. Is the motion seconded? The Manager of Opposition Business.
Seconded. He can't manage the parliament, the cabinet or the country. The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Leader of the House has the call.
I move that the member be no longer heard, Mr Speaker.
Question is that the Manager of Opposition Business be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. It would be helpful if members were to remain in their seats during this successive division, unless they're leaving the chamber, or they did not vote in the previous division, or they're changing their vote, in which case they must report to the tellers. Be helpful if members remain in their seat. The member for Corangamite. Lock the doors. Order. The question is that the Manager of Opposition Business be no further heard. Members must remain in their seat unless they're changing their vote or they did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 74, noes 71. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion be agreed to. The Leader of the House.
I move that the question be put.
The Leader of the House has moved that the question be put. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute and the tellers will do a full count. Oh. Yes. Tellers don't need to do a full count. I appoint the same tellers as per the previous division. Again, it would be helpful if members were to remain in their seats during this successive division, unless they're leaving the chamber or they did not vote in the previous division, or they are changing their vote, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. Lock the doors. The question is that the motion be put. Members must remain in their seats unless they are changing their votes or they did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 74, noes 71. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute, and on this division the tellers will do a full count. Lock the doors. Order. The question is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Lawler and Morton tellers for the ayes and the honourable members for Gray and Dawson tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 68, noes 74. The question is therefore resolved in the negative. No, I'm not going to pull out my ruling from the other day and circulate it. We're not going to have an athletic contest on this as people. The member for Capricorn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Minister update the House on how the agriculture sector is contributing to jobs for hard-working Australians and growth in the Australian economy? Is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
What a sensible rule.
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question and note the work that she's done towards making sure that we build Rookwood Weir, $130 million that the federal government has put towards it, and to be matched by the state government whenever we decide to hear from the Labor Party state government. But we look forward to actually getting that built, because that, of course, is jobs. There's an extra 2,000 jobs that would be attributable to that infrastructure, an extra $1 billion a year, $1 billion a year for the people of Central Queensland. I also note the work that the honourable member has done for Beef Australia, where we secured an extra $3 million to go through the 2018 Beef Week in Rocky. But she also talked about the work that agriculture has done. Agriculture is more than carrying its weight. In fact, in our nation, agricultural exports are now our second biggest export after iron ore. This comes on the back of the work that's done on the free trade agreements with China, Korea, Japan. And I might note, with our relationship with the United States, that it is one area that we have a trade surplus, in that we send them about $5 billion worth of exports. We import about $2 billion worth of exports. So we actually have a trade surplus in agriculture with the United States. It's also very important, the work that we are doing in improving beef roads, $100 million to beef roads, $100 million for beef roads, and the $594 million that we put into the inland rail so that we can create that corridor of commerce from Melbourne up to Brisbane through the inland. We put $100 million on the table for the Outback Way because we believe in the vision of sealing the third road across our nation, through the Alice, from Winton through to Laverton. But there are alternative policies, and the alternative policies are no better seen than the previous Labor government, which more than halved the budget in agriculture. That is what the Labor Party thinks of agriculture. More than halved the budget. By the time we came in, we had to refurbish all the requirements, whether for biosecurity, for research and development, because the Labor Party has no vision in agriculture. No vision in agriculture. no vision, and that continues to be the case, because the biggest threat to agriculture is the fact that they have weakness in the agricultural portfolio, a person who can't even stand up for the dance portfolio, who's rolled over and has offered up $235.2 million from the dance portfolio. It's a shame that they don't actually take it seriously. It's a shame that they have the same weakness when they closed down the live cattle trade, and created massive problems through the north of Australia. It's the same type of weakness they showed when they bought all the water back from Colorado, all the water, and put 58 people out of work in a town of 700. That's the sort of decimation you get with the Labor Party, a party that does not believe in jobs in regional area, a party that does not take agriculture seriously, a party that would put at risk our agricultural future in this nation.
The member for Bass.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Australian seafarers aboard the CSL Brisbane, including Andrew Halliday from my electorate, were made redundant by their foreign-owned employer, Canada's Steamship Lines. But there are 457 visa holders working for the same company on a similar vessel off Western Australia. Isn't it the case that the Prime Minister is so focused on his own job that he's forgotten about the jobs of Australian seafarers like Andrew, who's in the public gallery today?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. And I just remind the honourable member for Bass that his party is led by a man who is the absolute Olympic champion in issuing 457 visas. Nobody issued more 457 visas than the Leader of the Opposition did when he was the Minister. He was the champion. He was at the level of 457 visas issued today.
Members on my left.
More than a third lower than it was during the honourable member opposite's
member
time
for Griffith again.
As Minister. Mr Speaker, I'll ask the Immigration Minister to supplement this answer, but can I say to the honourable member, we are absolutely committed to ensuring that there are great jobs, more jobs, better paid jobs for Australians. The 457 visas, the regime governing them, has been constrained under our government, has been modified to better protect Australian jobs. It was running amok under the time of the Leader of the Opposition.
Just before I call the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, it's okay, the clerks are well in charge of the clock. They don't need any assistance. Okay? Just caution all those members, it's nearing the end of question time, who've been warned. The Minister for Immigration.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, as the Prime Minister rightly points out, when the Leader of the Opposition was the Employment Minister in the Gillard government, under the 457 program, the numbers grew from 68,000 to more than 110,000. Now, right on cue, the member for Isaac comes in and says, oh, well, this is all about the mining boom. The reality is that of the 40,000 additional 457s, there were only 3,000 who went to the mining sector. Now, under this government, the numbers of 457 visas has actually fallen. The objective of the program is to find work for Australians first. And if the job can't be filled by an Australian, then they can advertise for a 457 worker. Now, we have promised, and we've already delivered in part, Mr Speaker, on this, to tighten up the 457 program, but members might be interested to know the list that was the Consolidated Sponsorship Occupations list, presided over by Labor, included a number of particular classifications. One was boarding, kennel or cattery operator. The other one was goat farmer. There was sculptor and others. Now, we've said we're going to condense this list because we thought that the Leader of the Opposition was too liberal to allow goat farmers and goat herders into this country on 457 visas. This Leader of the Opposition can't be trusted. The Australian public has worked out that this is a dishonourable person who seeks to be Prime Minister of this country and this Leader of the Opposition, and people know, Mr Speaker, that he speaks out of both sides of his mouth on every issue, including this issue of 457 visas.
The member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline how the government is delivering on our plan to repair the budget and arrest national debt in the interest of hard-working Australians? Will the Treasurer inform the House how any other approach would jeopardise jobs and stifle growth?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Chisholm for her question, because she knows and she's pleased to be part of a government where the coalition has been getting on with the job of consolidating the budget and particularly getting expenditure under control. Under expenditure under this government, we have so far taken through this parliament budget improvement measures which count for $14 billion, Mr Speaker. That's what already we've been able to achieve as a government just since the last election, Mr Speaker. But in addition to that, under the budgets of those opposite, spending grew in real terms at 4.2% a year, Mr Speaker. That's what those opposite did with spending. It grew at 4.2% a year. Under the budgets of this government, Mr Speaker, under the budgets of this government, that has been cut to 1.5%. Now, that is a dramatic reduction in the growth of spending, which is arresting the debt. And we have a plan, Mr Speaker, to continue to consolidate the budget. And the budget is projected to return to balance in 2021. When the budget returns to balance, Mr Speaker, depends on whether the Labor Party is prepared to face up to their economic responsibilities and pass the savings and budget improvement measures which return the budget to surplus. But, Mr Speaker, those opposite have not engaged in that process to the full extent possible, and they know themselves that that will continue to put the budget position at risk and the ratings at risk, because they know that the ratings agencies have warned that unless the parliament is there to support the budget consolidation and the budget savings and improvement measures of the government, then that rating gets put at risk. Now, those opposite know that, but they have an alternative. And that alternative is not to reduce the deficit more, not to pass more budget savings measures, but to actually increase the deficit by $16.8 billion. They think the answer to saving the rating is to increase the deficit by $16.8 billion. And that is after, Mr Speaker, they abolish things like the corporate tax cuts for small and medium-sized businesses. Small and medium-sized businesses in this term. They want to oppose those cuts, Mr Speaker, that actually help small and medium-sized businesses give workers more hours. And we know, Mr Speaker, that our plans are designed to drive investment and drive jobs and drive growth. And we're in a competitive market. Now, we know that the Trump administration will be bringing down tax cuts for companies. We know the May administration is prepared to go even further when it comes to reducing the tax burden on businesses so they can support jobs, and they can support investment and they can support growth. And this government wants to do the same, but those opposites stand in the way, despite supporting those sorts of measures for decades, Mr Speaker. This government has a plan to drive jobs, drive growth. This opposition only has a job to drive the budget into the ground.
The Prime Minister.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. And at the risk of breaking the heart of the member for Isaacs, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Thank the Prime Minister.